stand on this rise above the harbour, and the modern skyline begins to dissolve. The concrete towers along the curving coast road fold backward into rubble and vanish. The citadel guarding the harbour mouth unbuilds itself, stone by stone. Traffic disappears from the waterfront. Then the waterfront itself disappears, swallowed by an advancing sea that recedes just as quickly, leaving behind only a long crescent of pale sand and marsh grass. A cluster of mud brick huts stands where a great capital will one day rise. This is the beginning. Before, the harbour had a name. Before, the coastline held anything more permanent than fishing boats pulled up on the shore. What follows across 23 centuries is the story of that same narrow strip of land, watched from this one fixed point, as empires rise upon it, fall into the sea beneath it, and rebuild upon the wreckage of what came before. Alexander the Great arrived here in the year 331 before the Common Era, recognizing what earlier rulers of Egypt had not: that a limestone ridge shielding a natural harbour from the open Mediterranean, fed by a freshwater lake at its back, could anchor a bridge between the Greek world and the Nile Valley. He commissioned the architect Dinocrates of Rhodes to lay out a new city on a strict grid, and legend holds that surveyors marked its earliest boundaries with barley meal, since no chalk was on hand. Within months, labourers began driving a stone causeway out from the shore toward a rocky island half a mile offshore, a project that would permanently divide the open sea into two sheltered harbours and reshape the coastline for the next 2,000 years. Alexander himself did not live to see his city built. He died before construction advanced far beyond its foundations, leaving the project to his successors. Command of Egypt passed to Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals, who founded a dynasty determined to make this half-built settlement into the most dazzling city in the Mediterranean world. Royal wealth from the Nile's grain surplus funded a building campaign on a scale the ancient world had rarely seen. The causeway was completed, creating the eastern harbour and the western harbour side by side, and at its outer tip a lighthouse tower began to rise, engineered by Sostratus of Cnidus. When finished, it stood well over 300 feet, its lower section square, its middle section octagonal, its upper section a cylindrical drum crowned by a great mirror that could hurl reflected light, or a signal fire far out across the water. It became, almost immediately, one of the wonders of the known world, and its silhouette would define this coastline for over 1,600 years. Behind it, the royal quarter, filled with palaces, gardens, and an artificial island reserved for the ruling family. Ptolemaic patronage also built the library and its attached research institution, drawing scholars from across the Greek-speaking world to study astronomy, medicine, geography, and literature under royal sponsorship. Marble sheathed nearly every major structure along this shoreline, replacing the timber and rough limestone of the founding years. The wide processional avenue running east to west through the city's centre became lined with colonnades, linking the harbour district to residential quarters further inland. What had been a construction camp scattered with labourers' tents became, within 2 generations, a city whose wealth and learning rivaled anything in the Mediterranean. Its lighthouse visible to sailors long before any other feature of the coast came into view. That prosperity eventually drew the attention of Rome, and internal succession struggles within the Ptolemaic dynasty gave Roman generals repeated cause to intervene in Egyptian affairs. During Julius Caesar's brief entanglement in a local succession dispute, fighting broke out near the harbour, and fire spread through warehouses along the waterfront, damaging stores of goods and, by later tradition, contributing to the loss of scrolls associated with the library's holdings. Egypt's independence ended formally under Cleopatra VII, and after her death, Rome absorbed the country as an imperial province, supplying grain to feed the capital on the Tiber. Augustus and, before him, Cleopatra herself, had commissioned a great temple to the ruling power, the Serapeum, built directly on this shoreline. And its dedication was marked by the erection of two towering granite obelisks, brought from the ancient temple complex at Heliopolis, each cut as a single block centuries earlier under a pharaoh's order and now repurposed to flank a Roman-era shrine. Roman engineering added public baths, an amphitheatre, and garrison quarters for the legions stationed to guard Egypt's grain fleet, the largest and most vital merchant fleet in the empire. But this era of imposed order did not last undisturbed. As the empire's religious character shifted toward Christianity in the 4th century, the older pagan institutions that had defined the city for 6 centuries came under direct assault. In the year 391, an imperial edict against pagan worship emboldened a Christian mob to storm and demolish the great temple of Serapis that had crowned the hill just behind this very vantage point, leaving standing only a single granite column raised decades earlier to honor the emperor Diocletian, a column that still marks this foreground today. Then, on a July morning in the year 365, a massive earthquake centered near Crete sent the sea rushing outward from this shore before returning as a wall of water. The ground beneath the royal quarter, already weakened by centuries of subsidence along a coastal fault, dropped permanently below sea level. Palaces, the artificial royal island, and a portion of the ancient waterfront sank into the harbor, never to be rebuilt on land again, and Christian basilicas began rising in their place, across the surviving high ground. Byzantine rule held Egypt for nearly 3 more centuries, but the empire's grip on this distant province was already loosening when an Arab army under Amr ibn al-As approached the city's walls in the year 641. The Byzantine garrison could not hold, and Egypt passed into the hands of the new Islamic Caliphate. The conquerors soon shifted the country's capital inland to Fustat, near modern Cairo, stripping this coastal city of its political primacy and leaving it to serve mainly as a fortified port. Ahmad ibn Tulun, governing Egypt for the Abbasid caliphs in the 9th century, ordered a new defensive wall built around a much smaller footprint than the old imperial city had occupied, abandoning entire districts of Roman-era streets to fall into ruin outside the new perimeter. Minarets rose above former churches, converted to mosques within the shrunken walls, while beyond them, date palms and modest farms spread across land that had once held temples and colonnaded avenues. The old causeway, no longer maintained as a monumental public work, quietly accumulated sand and silt carried by shifting currents, gradually widening from a narrow stone bridge into a broader spit of land. The lighthouse endured, repaired, and reused across the centuries as a watchtower, and later even fitted with a small mosque near its summit, though repeated tremors were steadily weakening its upper stories. 2 major earthquakes in the early 14th century finally brought the ancient tower down, ending a run of continuous service that had lasted longer than most empires. When the Mamluk Sultan Qaitbay looked to fortify this coastline against the growing threat of European naval raids and crusading fleets in the late 15th century, he ordered his engineers to quarry the fallen stone of the lighthouse itself, reusing its granite and limestone blocks to build a squat, powerful citadel directly on the old foundation. Completed in the year 1477, that fortress replaced the slender profile of the ancient wonder with the low, thick-walled silhouette of a Mamluk coastal stronghold, a shape better suited to withstand cannon fire than to house scholars or guide ships. The centuries that followed brought a long quiet. Portuguese sailors had found a sea route around Africa to the riches of India, and the trade that once justified this city's harbors increasingly bypassed it altogether. Ottoman conquest in 1517 absorbed Egypt into a much larger empire administered from Istanbul. And under loose Ottoman oversight, the old walled city on the mainland was gradually abandoned. Its freshwater canal, which had once carried Nile water to cisterns throughout the city, silted up and failed, and without reliable drinking water, the mainland district became increasingly uninhabitable. Residents relocated their homes, markets, and mosques onto the broadened spit that had once been the ancient causeway, now firm enough to support a compact wooden town of narrow lanes and overhanging balconies. The population fell to a few thousand fishermen and small traders, while the abandoned mainland reverted to open ground, scattered with fragments of marble and the isolated granite column that had survived the fall of the old temple. A brief French occupation under Napoleon Bonaparte, at the close of the 18th century, followed swiftly by British and Ottoman forces retaking the city, left military camps and earthworks that vanished again within a few years, disturbances too fleeting to alter the town's slow decline. Real transformation came only after Muhammad Ali seized control of Egypt in the early 19th century and set out to modernize the country by force of will. He ordered a canal dug to reconnect this city with the Nile, completed in 1820, restoring a reliable supply of fresh water and making large-scale settlement possible, again on the mainland, for the first time in centuries. European merchants, bankers, and shipping agents poured in to handle a booming trade in Egyptian cotton, and a grand new square rose on the peninsula, ringed with neoclassical facades built by immigrant communities from Greece, Italy, and France. That prosperity was violently interrupted in July of 1882, when a British fleet bombarded the city's fortifications, and much of the new European quarter burned in the resulting chaos. But reconstruction followed almost immediately, rebuilding the square on an even grander scale as steamships and a new railway line, the first on the African continent, tied the port more tightly than ever to global trade. The 20th century pressed the transformation further still. As Egypt's population grew, and the country gained independence from British influence following the Revolution of 1952, this coastline absorbed wave after wave of new construction. A modern seafront boulevard was built directly along the water's edge, backed by breakwaters engineered to hold back a sea that had already claimed one royal quarter centuries before. Villas and low colonial-era buildings gave way to dense apartment blocks rising 10, 15, 20 stories above streets, never designed for such weight. As the city's population swelled past several million residents, near the base of this hill, archaeologists uncovered a buried Roman theatre and residential quarter, preserved now as an open park beside the granite column that has stood continuously on this ground since the days of Diocletian. Out toward the harbour mouth, the old Mamluk fortress, built from the lighthouse's own stones, was restored and opened as a museum, its silhouette still marking almost precisely the spot where the ancient wonder once stood. And in 2002, a new library rose beside the eastern harbour, its tilted disc of grey granite deliberately evoking the scholarly ambitions of the ancient institution that had once studied the stars from this same shoreline. Container ships now anchor where grain fleets once loaded wheat for Rome, and the causeway that Alexander's engineers first drove into open water has become an entire built-up peninsula, indistinguishable today from the rest of the urban fabric around it. What began as a stretch of marsh and sand chosen by a conquering king for its harbour and its distance from the Nile's flooding, has become, without ever fully erasing what preceded it, a city of several million people. The granite column still stands where the temple once stood. The fortress still guards the harbour mouth where the lighthouse once burned. Somewhere beneath the waves just offshore, the palaces of the Ptolemies and the Caesars still lie where the earthquake left them. Nothing here was ever entirely swept away. Each age simply built its answer over what the age before it had left standing. And the coastline visible from this hill today is the sum of every one of those answers, layered one upon the other across 23 centuries of the same restless shore.